Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, February the 17th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, if you didn't hear, it just broke here in the last hour or so, or a couple of hours, late morning, that Jesse Jackson passed away. I think he was 84 or 86. I don't remember. He passed away in Chicago. I guess, my generation, we remember Jesse Jackson from his early days with Martin Luther King to very active in politics and political campaigns and social issues and very much on the TV, talking about this or that over the years. I don't consider myself a fan of his ideas. I would say that I think he wanted to solve too many problems with government, whereas I think a lot of the problems uh, could have been done more at the local level and through individuals. But anyway, that's just a debate that he and I had. But overall, you have to recognize his importance and his contributions. So we say rest in peace, Jesse Jackson. He was very unique. I'll tell you that right now. He was a very unique politician, or not. I guess he probably wouldn't consider himself a politician, although he did run for president twice. But whatever he would prefer to call himself, he was very good at it. And as I say, my generation, many times you turn on the TV, and there was Jesse Jackson speaking about this or speaking about that. So again, rest in peace to Jesse Jackson. I think, could be wrong about this, but I think when Martin Luther King was in that balcony the day that he was shot, I believe that Jesse Jackson was with him in that balcony, or certainly in that hotel room where he was staying the night that he was shot. I think I'm pretty right about that, or at least I remember a picture or a photo of that. So he was a young disciple of Martin Luther King back in '68 when that assassination happened. We're going to talk a little bit. I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about Secretary Rubio and the speech that he gave over in Munich. Great speech. People are already talking about Rubio and running for president in 28 and replacing Vance. I think that's very premature, but I can certainly understand why so many people are impressed with the job that Secretary Rubio is doing as a Secretary of State. I mean, he's doing a great job. I mean, he's doing a fantastic job as Secretary of State. So he's not a newcomer to politics, even though he's a young man. I think he's 55 years old for presidential politics. He's about that age. But my goodness, he's been so active and so well spoken, and such really in many ways a better spokesman for the Trump foreign policy than Mr. Trump himself. And that's because Rubio has a tremendous ability to communicate ideas. And that's why I think a lot of people want to see him run for president. And I'm not against that. But I think it's a little bit premature because you've got the Vice President Vance, let's say, there. And it would probably take a lot of maneuvering for Vance to step aside. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. I know everybody's speculating about it, but I don't see it happening. But let's talk about that speech, because what Secretary Rubio did is that he delivered a message to Europe that they've heard before. Okay, this is not the first time they've heard this, but I have never seen it presented quite this way before, as eloquently and I think as effectively. First of all, he went into the history of Europe and the United States, how connected we are. And he's cited his own example of his family. He mentioned Sardinia. I was not aware of that, but I guess many years ago. And of course, Spain. And then eventually his ancestors ended up in Cuba. My story is somewhat like that too. I was born in Cuba. My parents were born in Cuba, just like Rubio's case. but our ancestors came from Spain. And a lot of Americans can understand something like that as well. People were born here, their parents are born here, but maybe their grandparents were born in Germany or wherever. So there has been a connection between Europe and the United States or this part of the world for quite some time. And he talked about, this beautiful relationship that we've had over the years. He talked about art and books and music, and I thought that was great. He brought up the times that we have fought together, as we did in World War II, fighting Hitler, and then later in the Cold War, fighting communism. How our troops have died together. Well, they did on D-Day and many other battles. So I thought that was so well said, extremely well presented. He talked a little bit about what he called a climate cult. And he's exactly right. A lot of the, green energy madness in Europe is not necessarily driven by science or by logic. It just seems to be this green energy madness driven by a cult that has actually done more harm to the economy by driving up the cost of electricity and gasoline, heating and cooling, making it more difficult for energy or for companies to pay for their energy. And he wants them to have a more realistic approach to these things. And that makes a lot of sense. It might also make Europe more attractive to investment. That's not a bad thing as well. He talked about, the military arrangement that we've had for much of the last 50, 60 years, NATO, basically. NATO has been a great alliance, but over the years, a lot of the members of NATO have not paid what they're supposed to pay. They're supposed to pay 2% of their GDP, or at least can spend 2% of their GDP. 2% is not a lot of money, by the way. Spend that kind of money on investing in their own defense, and many countries have not. But we still have been defending them. And I think he basically said, hey, guys, we cannot continue for that to happen. So he went into a lot of these things that other presidents have mentioned before. I mean, President Trump is not the first president to have told Europe, hey, guys, you got to pay up more. You got to contribute to NATO more. I mean, President Obama did it. President Bush did it. So it's not the first time that a president has done this. It may have been the first time that it was presented as eloquently as Secretary Rubio did it. So I thought that was extremely effective. And then, of course, he brought up a sensitive topic that I mentioned in my article as well. And that is this madness of always apologizing about your past and the mistakes of the past, and whatever this mistakes were made, by your civilization before. Well, every civilization has made mistakes. Every people have things in their story that they're not crazy about, but that doesn't mean that everything else is bad or that you're not proud of it. So I thought it was a great speech. I thought it was right to the point. And as I said, there's already talk about Rubio 28. I think that's a bit early and a bit premature, but I think it just goes to confirm how impressive he was in that speech. Now, the other person who was there, and I have no idea why she was invited to speak. I can understand that she was invited to go as a member of Congress, but what she was doing in a panel is beyond me. And that's Representative Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. What she was doing talking about security is beyond me, because this is not an area that she has shown the slightest of interest or expressed any opinions, or frankly done any great deal of study, other than just a lot of slogans and lines that she has said, like Maduro and stuff like that she was saying at this conference. And she came across as completely unprepared, completely really just someone who should have never even been there representing the United States. And that's how she came across. She came across foolish. And of course, she tops it off by mocking Secretary Rubio when he talked about the horses and the cowboy culture and all of that. Well, Yeah, I mean, the representative AOC apparently didn't know that it was the Spanish who brought the horses over to the New World, and that's how we got horses. That's how we got that culture of horses. It wasn't in the movies, the Western movies. It was much before that, with the arrival of the Spanish in Mexico, and then of course the expansion of the Spanish in the Southwest and all of that. So she was completely unprepared for this meeting, totally completely unprepared, and it showed. And she's catching a lot of heat from a lot of friendly places who are basically saying, hey, you're not ready for this. So maybe the next time you think about going to one of these security conferences, maybe you should do a little reading on what's going on and prepare yourself a little bit better. So it was a great conference for Secretary Rubio, and honestly, a very bad one for Representative AOC of New York, who once again has demonstrated to me and many others that she's nothing but a TikTok member of Congress. She spends half of her day on TikTok talking about Trump. If she would only spend a little bit less time talking about Trump and maybe a little bit more time reading about economics and security, she might make herself a better presentation the next time. Let me leave you today with a little bit of history. Jim Brown, the great Jim Brown, was born on this day in 1936. He passed away in 23. If you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you remember Jim Brown. He was a great running back for the Cleveland Browns, who retired early and then went on to make movies. And I don't know what ranking he has, because there have been so many, obviously, great running backs over time. But in my book, he's number one. In my book, he's number one. I used to watch him play. And this is a guy who would average easily 100 yards a game. I mean, he was just absolutely incredible. So Jim Brown, my favorite running back, born on this day in 1936, passed away in 2023. I just remember watching Sunday afternoons, Jim Brown, those runs and touchdowns that he would do. It was just absolutely incredible. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.